you know, my grandmother had 3 teenage daughters who all had 2 children by the time they graduated high school.
My family was totally different. Excuse me. It was just passed on into the, on my father's side of the family, they was more the extended care family. You would pass the baby on or to the sister or great aunt. If they felt like that you weren't doing a good job with taking care of your baby, then they would just step in and take over. Whereas though on my mother's side of the family, it was just a no-no. It was a bad thing to have a baby. And nobody had a child till after they graduated from high school. And my mother was the only one that had me at 17. But it was just absolutely, it wasn't gonna be passed on. Your child wasn't gonna be taken care of by the extended family. You was just not gonna do that.
That's funny because my mother told me as an adult in my 30s, when I was old enough to understand it, we had this friction in our relationship and I didn't quite understand it, but my grandmother raised me and that's who I call mama. And my mother, I call her by her first name all of my young years growing up until my grandmother passed away. Then I started to try to figure out what to call my mother because she didn't like being called by her first name and I could tell. So she told me the story that I was named after my grandmother and she gave me, my mother was 14 when she got pregnant.
Okay.
So she turned 15 in September and 6 weeks later she had me. And she gave me to my grandmother is what she said. And she named me after my grandmother, both as an apology and as an honor. Like she was sorry for disappointing her. She knew she disappointed her. And she also wanted to honor her because that's what she thought of her. But it was a weird dynamic because my grandmother was my mother and my mother was more like an aunt or a sister kind of growing up. So that's how my mother came to understand what happens in the family if you get pregnant young. So she made it clear that I wasn't bringing no babies home to her because she was too young to be raising grandchildren. So that was the message I got. My grandmother had the rule that all her kids had to graduate high school. Even if they didn't want to do college, they had to graduate high school. And so it was her responsibility to make sure that that happened. So she raised all 6 of us. I had 1 brother and I have 4 cousins, and I always say we were raised like the Black Brady Bunch, except we didn't have Mike or Alice. So the 6 of us grew up together as siblings raised by my grandmother.